Why do we need the millennial generation for our next moonshot? My name is Talitha, and I'm going to share with you an idea that we can build our society based on the qualities of each generation. When I was in university, I first started listening to the music of Bob Dylan, the Beatles, and Bob Marley. And their voices, their lyrics took me back to the time of the flower power. The time when people all around the world started protesting for human rights, democracy, peace, and free love. They're called the famous baby boom generation, or also the protest generation. I was born in a completely different time period, 1991. It was the year that CERN put the first website ever online, and the Soviet Union stopped to exist. I don't recall any of these historical events. I was clearly busy doing other things. But I do consider myself to be a child of the 90s. I mean, Britney Spears runs through my blood and my veins. And we had Beyoncé too. So fast forward to 2017. I'm 26 years old right now, and I'm a millennial. And I've been running my own business since the age of 21. I've been developing stories about the millennial generation in collaboration with large organizations and thousands of young people. And I develop these stories about my generation because I want to learn how we think, feel, and live, how we were launched into this world that we didn't create, but I want to discover what also the potential is of my generation to change this world. My fascination for generations also comes from the fact that there's a huge age gap between me and my parents. My dad here in the picture is 74 years old, so hearing at an early age his stories about the time period he grew up in and his parents grew my fascination for these different generations. How does it work, these differences? So where do I stand on generation theory? I get asked a lot. Well, I do not believe that generations are biologically fixed, that they're absolute. I mean, how can being born 1 year earlier or 1 year later than the person who is sitting now next to you completely change the generation you belong to? They're arbitrary, the boundaries of generations. But I do believe that they are a historical reality in society, that they can teach us something about the spirit of an epoch, the zeitgeist, or the theme of a time, as the writer Gazette would call it. I believe that generations can show us how dominant ideas in society are developed, are passed on, or even radically thrown over by members of society. So thinking about generations is as old as the ancient Greek and Roman society. And so is complaining about the younger generation. Every generation has its doubts about the younger generation. They will mess up, they will ruin totally everything. Just take a look at this quote from a famous poet, T.S. Eliot. We can assert with some confidence that our own period is one of decline, that the standards of culture are lower than they were 50 years ago, and that the evidences of this decline are visible in every department of human activity. And who did he blame for this? The younger generation. And there's quite a parallel, actually, with current politicians here in the Netherlands saying we're in a decline of civilization, the cultural norms are vague, we need to re-educate young people, put them in military. So historians have actually found a term for this fear of the younger generation, and they call it apiphobia, the fear of youth. And according to historians, this increased during the industrialization, where young people were slowly removed from the workplace due to labor rights, civil rights, but they were left with an only relevant role for them, and that was that of consumer. And on top of that, popular media and also commercial organizations have further stereotyped the younger generation as being a consumer or a lazy consumer. Is there also a biological side to this story? Well, a rational argument that is often given to not give young people more autonomy or responsibility or influence in decision-making is that the frontal lobe of the brain, this part, which is responsible for all decision-making, organization and planning, impulse control, is not fully grown yet until the age of 25. So following that line of reason, I just gain an adult brain. I guess that's why they asked me to open the show. They trust me now. So is that a valid reason? Well, if you take a closer look at the brain, you actually see that different brain functions peak at different stages in life. So around the age of 18 and 19, you see a peak in processing large amounts of information and making fast decisions. Around the age of 40 and 50, people get better at recognizing other people's emotions and control their own emotions. And around the age of 60, your vocabulary peaks, which means you can express yourself better. So if you take a general look at this picture, you can also see that most brain functions actually peak between the age of 20 and 40, because after 40, the brain starts shrinking again. So wouldn't it make sense to give people who are now between their 20s and 40s, when their brain is peaking, more influence? That would be valid, right? So who is now in between their 20s and 40s? And I guess you're probably millennials. That's the millennial brain. Aren't we lucky? So what I'm saying is that we should give people between their 20s and 40s, there's a valid reason to give them more influence in decision-making processes. Not because they're a special generation, the millennials, but because they're in the right life stage to take more responsibility in matters that affect them. So just to be clear, it doesn't matter if you're from the baby boom generation, silent generation, or Generation X. What matters is the qualities and traits that fit with your lifestyle, and how can we build a society and our organizations around that. So if we take a look at the millennial generation, they just happen to be the ones whose brain is peaking. They're in a very active stage of their life. And they grew up in a time period in which they faced some very big system flaws in society, like the financial crisis, climate change. So they became very much aware during the adolescence, which is a very important stage in life, of these huge problems, but are also now ready to find solutions for them. So what would a society based on these different qualities of all generations look like? Well, I think it would look something like the TEDx stage, right? You would have Felix from Generation Z presenting the show, the millennials being on stage, leading the way with their visions and showing what can be done, Generation X, who are behind the scenes doing all the organizational planning and control, and trust me, they're running around like back there, and the baby boomers cheering and applauding, but also coaching us, guiding us, passing on their life experience. You could also apply it to the organizational level. What would that look like? In my vision, most people would be CEO between the age of 20 and 40 and quit after their 40s. This would mean for the other generations that they could take on roles that match better with their stage in life, like teamwork, passing on experience, guidance, coaching, supervision. I think that the millennial generation who faces burnouts and stress are in desperate need of very good coaches. And the other way around, I think that the older generation can learn a lot from the younger generations when it comes to new technologies and the new interfaces the millennial generation uses for communication. I think it would actually revalue the more seasoned worker because they don't have to compete with younger people for processing these huge amounts of information, these targets, being fast. No. They can use their qualities like passing on values, telling stories, passing on their experience to these younger workers. It would actually revalue them and make it more fair. So how can you go along with this? Tips and tricks. If you're a millennial, don't wait for leadership. Don't wait 20 or 30 years more until you're in that position and your brain has shrunk. Do it now. Demand it. If you're older than the millennials, try to build in this transformation phase in which you will make your millennial CEO within the next 2 or 3 years. Help them to achieve that. And start finding pleasure in skills like guiding others and encouraging others. And your support will mean the world for the next generation. And to all generations, let's also see it from a positive side. Let's embrace this diversity, not compete, because we're all gray and wild at some point in our lives. So how do I actually know that giving young people at the highest level in our society, in politics and in business, more influence, that it actually works? Well, I co-founded an organization that trains 20 and 30 years old to take part into the boardroom. They go into the heart of these organizations at the highest levels and address their topics that matter to the millennial generation, whether it's blockchain or work-life balance, selfie journalism to artificial intelligence. They address topics within the boardroom that matter to the millennial generations, its future, and it changes the conversation, and it changes actually the decisions that are being made at the highest level because of these inspiring interactions between generations. So after I've said all of this, it still may feel counterintuitive to put young people in a position of lots of influence. But as I showed you, there's also a huge potential. They're ready for it, and the interaction is very inspiring. People who understood this very well were the project managers of the Apollo 11 mission. What they did is they assembled for their mission a team with an average age of 28. 28. And did you know what the result was of that Apollo 11 mission? They put a man on the moon. So, in the face of huge global challenges like climate change, terrorism, defending our democracy, social tensions within society between groups, we need to put young people into leadership positions faster so that they can collaborate with the other generations, pick up where these generations left off, so we can create another moonshot. Thank you very much.